Penguin Random House Audio presents Bird Milk and Mosquito Bones, a Memoir. This is the author, Priyanka Mattoo. To Mom and Dad. Sarechukund terapat karar. A sparrow is content on its own thorny branch. Kashmiri proverb. Goddess of Destruction, 1989 to 1995. If only the house had been swept away in a flood, incinerated in a conflagration, or leveled in an earthquake. All three were likely in Kashmir, and a single event might have been easier to explain. But when anyone asks what happened, I say, it was burned down by militants. I know the blunt force of my words creates a conversational cul-de-sac, one that makes people spin right around and back to, well, anything else. Their own revelatory trip to India, the unusual amount of rain we're getting, whatever we were discussing just before. It's not only a conversation ender, it's a lie, but the truth would take too long. I was born a Hindu in the city of Srinagar, as was almost everyone in my family, for probably thousands of years. My parents decided to move abroad for work opportunities in the early 1980s, only so that they could gather funds to build their dream house back home. We spent every summer and holiday, 4 to 5 months a year, in Kashmir, the topmost region of the Indian subcontinent, nestled into the Himalayas. I was born in Habakadal, a neighborhood in central Srinagar, its maze of streets lined with narrow 4-story wooden houses. My parents built our house in the suburban area of Natipura on the south side of the city. It was lush then, with open fields, fresh air, and an unobstructed view of the foothills nearby. The house we were building would be rough-hewn stone, with a peaked wooden roof, the platonic ideal of a mountain dwelling. And as we traveled all over the world, we gently, in our hand luggage, carried back decorative items for this future home. Carefully sourced porcelain, hand-embroidered linens. There is a Kashmiri phrase, "Sare dod te mehe adij," bird milk and mosquito bones, used when someone is describing things so rare and precious that the listener should question their very existence. It comes to mind whenever I think about that little treasury of items we gathered. Once the house was built, I remember the heavy curtains I wrapped around myself in Natipura until I dislodged a family of mice. Afternoons cleaning string beans and corn from our vegetable patch. The time my mother told me not to play badminton into the evening, and it got so dark on the lawn that I smacked a shrieking bat into the net instead of the shuttlecock. Once, in the middle of a new moon night, I woke up and saw the faintest shadow of a bear dancing on its hind legs on the lawn. Nobody believes me about this one, but it happened. I split time between the Natipura house and my Matamal, my mother's ancestral home, in a verdant central Srinagar area, where I was the first of 8 grandchildren, doted on by a boisterous extended family. I can draw you a detailed architectural map of both homes. I can also recount every moment of our weekend trips to picnic in Pahalgam, a hill town so picturesque it is featured in many Hindi movies. We'd breakfast on chocolate-covered walnuts, tramp through a rushing stream, duck out of the way for people's endless honeymoon shoots, everyone for an age honeymoon there. This is all to say, many have waxed poetic on the marvels of Kashmir. Almost painfully beautiful, like staring at the sun, says a friend's mother. Indian travel posters touted the cliché of paradise on earth, which sounds like an exaggeration, but it was absolutely all of that. To my 9-year-old self, it was the most extraordinary, joyful place in the world. At the same time, being Kashmiri has always been difficult. My parents' generation had seen 2 wars between India and Pakistan over Kashmir, followed by an insurgency against Indian rule and rapid militarization in the winter of 1989 to 90. When the violence began, many pundits, as Kashmiri Hindus are known, were targeted and killed by militants. This led to rushed middle-of-the-night departures by most of our community, including my extended family. My parents, brother, and I were living abroad as the house in Natipura was being built, always with the idea that we'd return. I usually rattle off these facts simply and without emotion as a child would, so I don't cry. But here I'll say more. Fire was involved, and militants, but our definitive severance came about slowly and strangely. The first thing that happened was I woke up in the middle of the night in our apartment in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to hear adults speaking in low, serious voices in the living room. I wandered out in my pajamas, and I was startled to see my grandparents, my father's parents. I hardly recognized them. Papaji's well-moisturized cheeks hung low, like those of a cartoon bloodhound. His eyes tired, no sparkle. Bobby wore a drab brown salwar kameez. I had only seen her in saris, shades of green to match her eyes. They all sat on the ground, as though after their flight here, they had run out of energy to raise themselves to chair level. My parents told me to go back to sleep. When I remind my parents of this memory, they say it never happened, that Bobby and Papaji had already been visiting us in the fall of 1989. They say we had just gotten back from another summer in Srinagar, putting finishing touches on the house. The mason who had built our house came over to take a look at the garage, where Dad was thinking of adding a room. The idea was that in a few years he'd have raised the funds to build a children's hospital in Srinagar, and we'd be back full-time. "Is it possible you might not come back?" asked the mason. "Because if you're not coming back, you might want to sell this place." Dad was surprised. There had been a couple of small blasts in Kashmir that summer, but nothing anyone was worried about. In retrospect, he sees maybe he should have been. While Bobby and Papaji were visiting us that fall, we heard that things were getting worse back home. That pundits were being threatened and targeted, that our community was being advised to leave for a time. Letters had appeared on the doors of Hindu families across town, letters saying we should leave or be killed. Then Urdu-language newspapers started urging non-Muslims to leave, so they did. Bobby and Papaji left in January 1990, in a truck in the middle of the night, and made their way to nearby Jammu. Like all the other families who left that month, they traveled with a couple of suitcases and one photo album. Eventually, they landed in Delhi, where Papaji's company had an office, and Dad went to get them settled in. He was horrified to see how they were living. Papaji had rented a single room in which the three of them slept. Dad asked Bobby for a glass of water, and she disappeared for half an hour. The one fridge in the building belonged to the landlords on the bottom floor, and she was waiting for them to be available to dispense Dad's drink. A single bathroom shared with 4 other families was down the hall. Dad was heartbroken on top of heartbroken, and having just had one home wiped out, he wearily began the process of figuring out a better living situation in Delhi. A new flat would need to be built, but it would take a couple of years. Until then, on our visits to Bobby and Papaji, we'd all sleep together in that one room. Meanwhile, we heard that the house in Kashmir had been looted. Everything my parents had collected to furnish it with was gone. The next summer in Delhi felt almost luxurious, as the 6 of us expanded into a 2-room rental. But if this was our new life in India, I fell asleep thinking I didn't want to come back. Matamal cleared out in the same way, everyone moving to wherever they had the closest relatives. By 1992, when I was 12, Nani and Nanaji, Mom's mother and father, had also ended up in Jammu, at the house of Nani's widowed sister-in-law, whom we called Mamiji. I loved Mamiji. A stately dowager with a plummy accent, serenely sitting under piles of knitting projects in her shaded garden. Her husband, Nani's brother, had worked at the UN, and their life had taken them all over the world. Her rambling house in Jammu reminded me of Matamal with its multiple living quarters. My grandparents lived in an apartment on the south end, facing a garden full of butterflies. They had found a tenant for Matamal, which was still considered safe for now. And it wasn't so bad in Jammu. Delhi had felt hostile, and even walking through its airport sent me into a spiral of despair. But Mamiji's house had enough familiar touches to remind me of our actual home. Even the patio, off of which my grandfather had a room of his own in which to read, watch movies, and have his nightly measure of scotch after dinner. Evacuation may have been dramatic, but I took some comfort in the familiarity of Nanaji's daily routine. But outside of Mamiji's house, nothing was the same. A horde of Kashmiri Hindus had moved to Jammu that year after the troubles started, which gave us a sense of safety. There were people we knew around, but danger loomed there too. One day, Mom and I had made plans to see a movie at the cinema with her cousin, my Billy Masi. At the last minute, we decided to get ice cream instead, and heard that there had been a bomb blast that took out the entire section where we would have been sitting. We were supposed to be safer here, I remember thinking, but maybe I would never feel safe again.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?